He slides the warm plate toward me, smiling softly while the kitchen light catches something wrong in the eggs. The kitchen is quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint scrape of ceramic on stone as the plate stops in front of my hands. It's just the two of us here early morning, the window above the sink leaking a thin line of pale light across the counter. And my immediate goal is simple and ordinary to eat, to thank him, to keep the morning moving the way it always does. The glass reflection on the plate doubles the eggs at a strange angle, yolks splitting into two imperfect suns, and my fork pauses before it touches anything. "I made it the way you like," he says, voice calm, already seated, already watching. I nod, because nodding is easier than explaining the tightness that starts in my chest, the kind that doesn't belong to hunger. I tell myself it's nothing, just a shadow, just light doing what light always does on glossy surfaces. "You're staring," he adds, still smiling, and the smile lands before the words, which is backwards, and I feel the smallest shift inside me, the kind that comes when routine misses a step. I lift the fork anyway because that's what wives do when their husbands make breakfast, and because the cost of not doing it feels heavier than the cost of doing it. The fork scrapes softly, a sound too loud in the stillness, and he leans back, arms crossing a posture that looks relaxed until you notice how still he becomes once I move. "Eat," he says, gentle, and the command hides inside the care. I breathe in, and there's a faint scent under the butter and salt, something medicinal and clean gone as soon as I notice it, and my stomach tightens before my mind can find a reason. "You're working from home today?" I ask, buying time, keeping the fork suspended, watching the reflection wobble as my hand trembles just enough to notice. "Schedule changed," he says. "Don't worry about it." The answer is too quick, and the light on the plate fractures again, a thin line slicing the eggs in half. "You didn't have to," I say. And he laughs softly, the sound landing wrong like it belongs to a different sentence. "I wanted to," he replies. "It's my job to take care of you." The word job hits harder than it should, and I feel the room narrow, the counter edge biting into my palm as I steady myself. I take a small bite, because not taking it would be an accusation, and the taste is fine, normal even, but the afterfeel lingers too long, coating my tongue in something metallic that doesn't belong to breakfast. My throat tightens, and I swallow, forcing a smile that mirrors his, because mirroring keeps the peace. "Good," he asks. "It's good," I answer. And the lie slides out smoothly, practice the way lies do when you've had years of training. He nods satisfied and reaches for his coffee, the mug clinking against the saucer in a way that makes me flinch. "You always overthink food," he says, chuckling. "That consultant brain of yours." The needle is thin but sharp, sliding under my skin with a precision that makes my jaw tighten. "Say it again. Your title is nutrition consultant, not chemist," he adds lightly, as if correcting a child, and the words sting because they're accurate enough to wound. I set the fork down carefully, the tines catching the light, and the reflection on the plate splits again, refusing to settle. "I'm just tired," I say, and he nods like he's won something small. "Then eat," he repeats, and the repetition feels like pressure. I reach for my water glass instead, the rim cool against my lips, and watch his eyes track the movement, the way they linger a beat too long. "You didn't drink yesterday," he notes. "Dehydration messes with your head." Another needle, this one threaded with concern, and I feel the room tilt slightly as my stomach rolls. The consequence lands immediately. My appetite collapses, replaced by a low, spreading heat that crawls up my neck. I push the plate a fraction of an inch away, pretending to adjust my seat, and the movement is small enough to miss, unless you're watching for it, unless you're waiting. He notices. He always notices. "Don't start," he says quietly. The smile gone now, and the absence of it feels louder than any raised voice. Start what I ask, keeping my tone even, my hands folded in my lap, where he can't see them shake. "This," he replies, gesturing at the plate, making a thing out of nothing. The accusation hangs there, and I feel the familiar weight of it press down, the way it always has when I question timing or ingredients or anything that disrupts his version of order. I glance at the plate again, at the way the eggs look slightly dull under the light, at the glass reflection that makes them look doubled distorted, and my pulse thuds hard enough to hear in my ears. The reflection refuses to line up, and my body knows, before my brain does, that this moment is dangerous. I think of all the mornings before this one, all the times I've eaten without thinking, without watching his face for signs that don't belong, and the thought lands heavy sour. I'll finish it later, I say, pushing the plate a little farther away now, committing to the movement, and the consequence is immediate. His chair scrapes back an inch, a sharp sound that slices through the quiet. "That's wasteful," he says, voice flat. "You know I hate waste." The word hate is new here, sharpens the air, and I feel my stomach lurch, heat blooming under my ribs. "I'm not hungry," I repeat, and he studies me in silence, the kind that feels like being measured. "You're being difficult," he says finally, and the sentence lands like a verdict. I stand because sitting feels like surrender, and the room seems to tilt as I do the light shifting the reflection on the plate, warping one last time as I turn away. "I have a call," I say, reaching for my phone, and he watches me the entire time, eyes following, calculating. "Don't be late," he says, already picking up his mug again, already done with me, and the dismissal tightens something in my chest that makes it hard to breathe. I carry the plate to the sink, water running too loud as I set it down, the smell rising again sharper now that I'm closer, and my hands shake as I rinse the fork, the metal cold and unforgiving. He doesn't stop me. He doesn't have to. The silence stretches heavy and deliberate, and I know with a clarity that makes my skin prickle that whatever is happening here isn't over, that this was only the first move. I leave the plate untouched in the sink, knowing the reflection has already chosen a side. I'm Emily Carter, 38, a nutrition consultant from Naperville, Illinois, and mornings used to be the safest part of my day. That morning came back to me later in fragments, the way memory does when it's trying to protect you from seeing too much at once. And I remembered how ordinary everything looked after I left the kitchen, how the house settled into its familiar quiet as I closed the door behind me. The cold doorknob bit into my palm as I stepped out, a sharp grounding sensation that made me pause just long enough to notice how still the house felt, without me in it, as if it were holding its breath. He called after me, "Keys," and I lifted them from the hook metal clinking too loud in the narrow hallway. "You okay?" he asked, already sounding bored with the question. "Just tired," I said, because that answer had always worked before. "You should eat more in the mornings," he replied, not looking at me, his voice drifting from the kitchen like an afterthought. "You're not built for skipping meals." The comment slid under my skin precise enough to sting, and I felt that familiar urge to correct him rise and then flatten itself back down. I drove to work with the radio off, replaying the light on the plate, the way the eggs had looked wrong without being obviously wrong, and I told myself I was being dramatic, that years of advising clients to listen to their bodies had turned into a professional reflex I couldn't shut off. At my desk, I lined up my notes the way I always did, edges straight pen, placed just so, control returning in small, manageable pieces. "You look pale," a coworker said in passing. "Did you eat?" Of course I answered automatically, the word coming out smoother than it should have. I spent the morning on autopilot, consulting calls, quick emails, the rhythm of work steadying me, but every time I paused, that faint, clean scent from the kitchen seemed to resurface just out of reach of logic. Around midday, my phone buzzed with his name, and my stomach tightened before I even opened the message. "Don't forget dinner tonight," he'd written. "I'll cook again." The offer read like kindness, but something in the phrasing pressed against me, a subtle insistence that made my shoulders tense. I typed back, "We'll see," and stared at the words longer than necessary before sending them. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of normalcy that felt almost aggressive in its insistence that nothing was wrong. I met with a client who laughed about her new diet, listened to another complain about cravings, nodded at all the right moments, and all the while my mind kept circling back to the plate, to the way the light had split across it, creating two versions of the same thing. The glass showed a second version of the same plate. The thought came uninvited, lodged itself in my chest, and I pushed it away because there was no place for it yet. When I got home, the house greeted me with the same quiet it always had, shoes lined up by the door, his jacket draped neatly over the chair. "You're late," he called from the living room, not looking up from his laptop. "Traffic," I said, setting my bag down carefully. "You always say that," he replied, fingers still tapping the comment, landing somewhere between a joke and a warning. I moved through the kitchen, opening the fridge, scanning shelves, noting the absence of leftovers from breakfast, the plate already washed and back in its place. "Did you throw out the eggs?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Why would I do that?" he said, finally glancing at me. "You didn't finish them." "I figured I'd save them," I said. He frowned, just a flicker. "That's not safe," he replied. "You know better than that." The needle was there again, thin and exact, and I felt my jaw tighten. "It was only out for a little while," I said. "Food safety guidelines don't care about little whiles," he shot back. "Read the clause out loud. The room should hear it." The mockery in his tone made heat creep up my neck, and I forced myself to breathe evenly. "I didn't mean anything by it," I said. "You always mean something," he replied, closing his laptop with a decisive snap. "You just don't like admitting it." The consequence came fast. The air between us thickened, his attention sharpening in a way that made my skin prickle. I busied myself with the sink water running, hands steadying on familiar motions, and told myself this was how arguments started, not how disasters did. "You didn't answer my message," he said, leaning against the counter now close enough that I could smell his cologne. "About dinner." "I said we'll see," I replied. "That's not an answer," he said. "It's a delay." "I had a long day," I said, and he laughed softly, the sound landing wrong. "You always have an excuse," he replied. "That's your thing." The words lodged somewhere deep, and I felt the urge to push back flare, and then dim years of habit smoothing it over. We ate something simple that night, nothing he'd prepared, and the absence of tension felt like relief, even as it unsettled me. Later, lying in bed, I listened to his breathing even out beside me, and stared at the ceiling, tracing shadows as cars passed outside the day, replaying in fragments that refused to settle into a single comfortable story. I told myself I was safe, that marriage was built on trust, that my job trained me to look for problems where there often weren't any, and the logic almost worked. The longer I replayed the morning, the more the ordinary details rearranged themselves into a warning. Sleep came in fits, shallow and restless, and when I woke before dawn, the house felt different, quieter somehow, as if it were waiting to see what I would do next. The cold doorknob waited in the dark, reminding me that thresholds only matter once you cross them. The next afternoon, the house was empty in a way that felt intentional, every sound sharper, because there was nothing to soften it. I stood alone in the kitchen, with the window cracked open, late light slanting across the counter. My immediate goal, narrow and dangerous to clean, without erasing anything I might need later. The half-open drawer beneath the counter caught my eye. First, its edge casting a thin shadow that split the floor in two, and I hesitated before pulling on gloves, because hesitation felt like a line I couldn't uncross once I stepped over it. I told myself I was being thorough, not suspicious, as I lifted the plate from the rack where it had dried, spotless, at a glance innocent. The glass reflection along the rim bent the light again, and my stomach tightened with the same quiet warning I'd felt the morning before. "You're overthinking." His voice echoed in my head, familiar enough to almost feel real, and I shook it off, turning the plate slowly, letting the light travel. That was when I saw it, not a stain, not a spill, just a faint, chalky residue clinging to the underside of the rim where fingers wouldn't normally touch. My breath caught sharp and involuntary, and the consequence landed immediately. My hand started to shake hard enough that I had to set the plate down before I dropped it. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, the words sounding thin in the quiet kitchen. I leaned closer, nose wrinkling, catching that same clean medicinal scent, stronger now that I was looking for it. The half-open drawer yawned at my side, and I reached into it, fingers brushing against the familiar clutter, until I found a cotton swab, the kind I used for quick demonstrations with clients. "Just to be sure," I whispered, knowing even as I said it that there was no version of this that ended with me being sure of nothing. I swabbed the residue carefully, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the hum of the fridge, and sealed it in a small envelope from my work bag, the motion precise, professional damning. The ref code I scribbled on the corner, Just 4 characters I used out of habit felt heavier than ink as I added the kitchen location beneath it, grounding the moment in something real and traceable. The cost hit me all at once. If I was wrong, I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. If I was right, the line had been crossed long before this. I rinsed the plate again longer this time, watching the water bead and slide away, and every drop felt like erasure. "What are you doing?" His voice came from the doorway, sudden enough to make me flinch, and the envelope slipped from my fingers, skidding across the counter. I turned, forcing my shoulders to relax. "Cleaning," I said too quickly, and the word echoed between us. He stepped closer, eyes flicking to the counter, to the sink, to my hands. "You missed a spot," he said lightly, reaching past me to adjust the plate, his fingers brushing mine, cold and deliberate. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I pulled back, knocking the envelope to the floor. He frowned, bending to pick it up. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over. My mind raced, calculating faster than my mouth could keep up. "Client sample," I said. "I forgot it in my bag." He studied the envelope, the ref code, the neat handwriting, and for a split second the room felt airless. "You bring work into my kitchen now?" he asked, the smile gone, replaced by something flatter. "It's temporary," I replied. "Relax." He straightened, slowly handing it back. "You should learn to separate things," he said. "That's why people get confused." The needle slid in clean, and the consequence followed immediately. My heart hammered harder, my certainty sharpening into something cold and focused. "You're right," I said, pocketing the envelope. "I'll be more careful." He watched me a moment longer, then shrugged, already losing interest. "I have a meeting," he said. "Don't wait up." The door closed behind him with a soft finality, and I stood there, the envelope burning against my thigh, the half-open drawer still gaping at my feet like a mouth that had almost said too much. I sank into a chair, breathing through the tremor that wouldn't stop, and stared at the plate, now gleaming harmless again. The logic clicked into place with a sickening clarity. Residue doesn't appear by accident. Not like that. Not there. The moment I sealed the sample, the kitchen stopped feeling like a room and started feeling like a crime scene. I tucked the envelope deeper into my bag, knowing that whatever I just found wasn't meant for me alone, and that pretending otherwise would only buy him time. The half-open drawer stayed where it was, holding the space between what I'd seen and what he thought I knew. The cafeteria smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, a public blend that flattened everything into sameness, and I chose a table near the glass wall because reflections behaved better there, or at least I could watch how they lied. It was just after lunch rush, enough people lingering to make movement noticeable without being chaotic, and my immediate goal was simple and precise: to observe, without intervening, to let whatever was already in motion reveal itself. Megan Holt slid into the seat across from me with her tray, polite smile already in place, the kind assistants learn to wear like armor. "You don't mind if I sit?" she asked. "Of course not," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She set her phone down beside her plate, the screen lighting her cheek from below as notifications bloomed and faded, a pale glow that sharpened the planes of her face. "Busy day," she added. "Always," I replied. She glanced at the plate in front of her, eggs again, cafeteria version, and hesitated for half a beat before picking up her fork. "You're not eating," she noted, eyes flicking to my untouched salad. "I'm not very hungry," I said. She laughed softly. "I wish I had that problem." The fork hovered. The moment stretched. She took a bite. The consequence came quickly, almost rudely. Her smile faltered, just a flicker, and she swallowed too fast, hand rising to her throat. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said too quickly, already reaching for her water. "Just dry." The phone on the table lit again, reflecting in the glass wall behind her, doubling her movements, and I watched her face tighten as she took another sip. "Did you get that memo?" she asked, changing subjects with effort. "Which one?" "About reimbursement procedures." She said, words careful. "The new language is specific." "Specific?" how I asked. She shrugged, but her shoulders stayed raised, tension refusing to drain. "About approval," she said. "And timing." She pushed her plate away a fraction of an inch, the movement small but deliberate. "You don't like the eggs?" I asked lightly. "They're fine," she replied, then paused. "They taste clean." The word landed wrong in the open space between us. "Clean," I repeated. "Like sanitizer," she added, laughing it off, but the laugh died early. The phone buzzed again and she glanced down the light, carving a sharp line along her jaw. "Sorry," she said. "I just need a minute." She stood too fast, chair legs scraping loud enough to turn heads, and stumbled toward the trash can, hand over her mouth. A couple at the next table stopped talking. Someone coughed. I stayed seated, hands folded, watching as she retched quietly, the sound thin and humiliating in the open room. A security camera dome above the drink station caught the light, its black eye reflecting the scene back at us. "Is she okay?" a woman whispered nearby. "Probably food poisoning," a man replied. "They should shut this place down." Megan straightened, face pale, and waved off a staff member who'd hurried over. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Just skipped breakfast." The lie sat heavy. She rinsed her mouth at the sink, eyes darting, and when she returned, she didn't sit back down. "I need some air," she said, already backing away. "You sure I asked?" She nodded too hard. "Yeah, I'll message you." She didn't. She left her tray untouched, the eggs cooling under fluorescent light, and the murmurs resumed, softer now, but changed, threaded with speculation. "You saw that right," a voice behind me said. She turned green. "Cafeteria eggs," someone else muttered. "Always risky." I gathered my things slowly, forcing my breathing to stay even as my pulse hammered. At the exit, Megan leaned against the wall phone, pressed to her cheek, the glow stark against her skin as she whispered urgently, "I caught fragments. Bathroom can't stop shaking. No, not like that," before she noticed me watching and turned away. "Don't tell anyone," she said when she saw me, voice low and embarrassed. "It's probably nothing." Probably I agreed. A supervisor approached clipboard tucked under his arm. "We need a name for the incident log," he said, eyes flicking between us. "Standard procedure." Megan froze. "Incident?" she echoed. "You were visibly ill in a public area," he replied. "Seat number." He glanced at the table. Blue wristband. "She was at C14. Someone volunteered from behind us." "Blue band," another added. Megan's shoulders slumped. "I don't want trouble," she said. "Read the policy out loud," the supervisor replied evenly. "The room should hear it." The needle line cut clean, procedural and cruel, and the consequence followed immediately. Phones lifted. Whispers sharpened the camera dome above the door, catching everything. I stepped back, giving her space, watching the reflection in the glass wall fracture as staff clustered. When her phone lit her cheek again, the public room learned what private nausea looks like. I left without saying goodbye, the sound of the cafeteria swallowing me whole as I crossed into the lobby, knowing that what had just happened would not stay contained. By the time I reached the door, the camera had already decided this wasn't an accident. By the time I got home that evening, the house felt smaller, the walls closer, as if the space itself had absorbed what happened at the cafeteria and was waiting to see how I'd handle it. I set my bag down on the counter and pulled out my laptop, my immediate goal shifting from observation to confirmation, from watching to proving. The paper edge from a legal pad sliced lightly into my finger as I flipped it open too fast, a thin sting that grounded me blood, blooming bright and brief before I pressed it away with a tissue. Focus. I told myself the word steady, even as my pulse refused to slow. I logged into a secure portal I used for professional consultations, not pulling anything I wasn't allowed to see, just lining up what was already public-facing, already logged. The cost was there, humming beneath the surface. Every click felt like a step deeper into something I couldn't unlearn. I opened a symptom correlation note from earlier in the day, one I'd drafted after Megan left the cafeteria, careful to keep it clinical detached. Nausea onset within minutes, tremor, throat irritation. I added a window of intake based on observation alone, anchoring it to a general time of day rather than a date the way I'd been trained to do when precision could hurt someone. The correlation tightened as I read it back, the logic lining up with a sickening neatness that made my stomach flip. "You're stretching," I whispered, even as my hand hovered over the save button. I saved it anyway. The confirmation landed hard and immediate. This wasn't random, and it wasn't mild. A knock sounded at the doorframe, sharp enough to make me flinch. "What are you working on?" he asked, already stepping into the kitchen, eyes flicking to the screen. I angled the laptop just enough to block his view, the movement small but instinctive. "Client notes," I said. "Late consult." He leaned closer, scanning the room. Instead, the tissue in my hand, the faint smear of red on my finger. "You cut yourself," he noted. "Careless." "Paper," I replied. "It happens." He smiled, thin and quick. "You should pay attention," he said. "Little things add up." The needle slid in clean, precise enough to hurt, and the consequence followed instantly. My resolve sharpened, the fog thinning, as fear gave way to something colder. "You should wash that," he added, nodding toward the sink. "Infection risk." I know, I said, standing the chair legs scraping too loud as I did. At the sink, I rinsed my finger, watching the water carry the last trace of blood away, the paper edge still burning in my mind. He lingered behind me close enough that I could feel his presence without seeing it. "You didn't tell me about the cafeteria," he said casually. My shoulders tensed. "Why would I asked. "People talk," he replied. "You were there." I turned, meeting his eyes. "Someone got sick," I said. "It happens." He studied me for a beat too long. "Does it?" he asked. "Timing matters." The words echoed something I'd read earlier, and my chest tightened. "I'm tired," I said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. "I'm going to bed." "Already?" he asked. "You barely ate!" There it was again, the fixation dressed as concern. "I'll eat later," I said. "You always say that?" He replied, a familiar refrain that felt newly sharpened. He reached for the legal pad, flipping it open, his finger brushing the edge where I'd cut myself. "Messy notes," he said. "You know documentation can be misread." The implication hung there heavy. "That's why I'm careful," I replied, taking the pad back, my grip firmer than before. He watched me walk away, and I felt his gaze like pressure between my shoulder blades. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle my heart, finally slowing enough to think clearly. The correlation note replayed in my mind, each symptom slotting into place with the memory of Megan's pale face, the way her hands shook. Logic broke through denial in a clean, unforgiving line. This wasn't about me being sensitive. This was about dosage timing exposure. The moment the pattern locked, I understood this wasn't an argument waiting to happen, but a plan already in motion. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, listening to him move around the house, every sound cataloged, every pause noted. The paper edge throbbed in time with my pulse, a small constant reminder that evidence cuts both ways. As the house settled into silence, the cut on my finger felt like the smallest proof that accidents don't repeat themselves this neatly. The light in the garage flickered as I stood beneath it, the bulb stuttering between brightness and shadow, in a way that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. I'd come out here under the excuse of grabbing a spare charger, but my real goal was narrower and riskier, to listen without being seen, to confirm whether the pattern I'd locked onto was supported by something concrete. My phone felt heavier in my hand than it should have, the screen dark, the device warm from my grip. The garage smelled faintly of oil and damp concrete, a neutral place, a place he rarely lingered, which was exactly why I'd chosen it. I pressed play on the audio file I'd copied earlier, my thumb hovering, in case I needed to kill the sound fast. His voice came through, first low, and controlled the cadence familiar enough to make my stomach tighten. "You can't rush it," he said, the words clipped professional. "Timing matters." The flickering bulb above me buzzed softly, the sound threading through his voice, and I felt the two rhythms sync in a way that made my skin prickle. Another voice responded, distorted, cautious. She noticed, the voice said. I think she noticed. My breath caught sharp and involuntary, and the consequence landed immediately. My pulse spiked, my ears ringing as if the sound had physical weight. "She always notices," he replied calmly. "That doesn't mean she understands. I paused the audio heart hammering and leaned back against the cold metal shelf, forcing myself to breathe. I replayed it, listening for context, for a mistake, for anything that could soften the impact. There was none. The file header showed a short reference code and a time of day stamp I'd memorized earlier, a window that overlapped too neatly with the morning he'd made breakfast. The logic snapped into place, unforgiving. This wasn't a hypothetical conversation. This was operational. I heard footsteps above me, the door to the house opening, and I killed the audio, instantly slipping the phone into my pocket as the light flickered again, plunging the garage into half shadow. "You out here?" he called. "Yeah," I answered, steadying my voice. "Just grabbing something." He appeared at the top of the steps, silhouette framed by the doorway, watching the flicker like it annoyed him. "That bulb's going," he said. "I'll replace it." "It's fine," I replied too quickly, and he glanced at me, eyes narrowing just a fraction. "You don't like flickering lights," he said. "They make you jumpy." The needle slid in precise and observational, and the consequence followed. My jaw tightened, my resolve hardening into something sharp. "Everyone does," I said. He shrugged. "Suit yourself." He turned away, already done with the conversation, and I waited until his footsteps faded before exhaling. Under the flickering light, reflections stopped agreeing. The words surfaced fully formed, and this time I didn't push them away. I scrolled through the audio again, isolating the segment, noting the ref code, the overlap, the casual certainty in his voice when he talked about me like a variable, not a person. The cost of listening pressed down hard. Every second I spent with that file was another second I couldn't claim ignorance. I shut the phone off and leaned against the wall, the bulb buzzing overhead like a warning. The garage felt less like storage now, and more like a holding cell, every object suddenly suspect. I went back inside and found him at the kitchen table, papers spread out, his attention elsewhere. "You look pale," he said without looking up. "You should sit." "I'm fine," I replied, passing him my shoulder, brushing his, as I did the contact electric and unwanted. "You sure?" he asked. "You've been on edge." "Work," I said. "It always is," he replied, and the dismissal felt heavier now that I knew what it covered. Upstairs, I locked the bathroom door and stared at myself in the mirror, the flicker from the hallway light behind me cutting my reflection into pieces. His voice replayed in my head, calm and methodical, and the fear that had been simmering finally sharpened into something actionable. The audio stripped away my last excuse, turning suspicion into a timeline I couldn't ignore. I turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the house breathe around me. As the bulb continued to flicker in the garage below, I knew the window to act was already closing. Rain slicked the sidewalk outside the office, turning the late afternoon into a gray smear that matched the pressure building in my chest as I stepped through the lobby doors. My coat sleeve was damp where it clung to my wrist, the fabric heavy and cold, and my immediate goal was containment, to make sure what had already surfaced didn't ripple outward before I understood how far it reached. The receptionist glanced up as I passed, eyes flicking to my face, and then away, recognition there now where there hadn't been before. "They're asking questions upstairs," she said quietly, as if we were sharing something private. "About yesterday." "Who is?" I asked. "Compliance," she replied. "And HR." The words landed with weight, and the consequence followed immediately. My pulse jumped every step toward the elevator, suddenly deliberate. The doors slid closed, trapping my reflection with me, rainwater darkening my sleeve in uneven patches as the car rose. On the third floor, a familiar voice called my name before I could reach my desk. "Emily, a minute." It was Mark from operations clipboard, tucked under his arm, expression too careful. "Sure," I said, already knowing I didn't have a choice. He led me into a small conference room, glass walls fogged from the weather outside, chairs arranged with unnecessary precision. "This is routine," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "We just need clarity." "About what?" "Scheduling," he replied, opening the clipboard. "And access." He slid a printed email across the table, the header visible, the office location stamped at the top. The mismatch was obvious to anyone who knew how to read it. his calendar showing him off-site when the cafeteria incident occurred an approval chain that shouldn't have lined up. "This came up during review," Mark said. "Can you confirm whether he was here yesterday morning?" The question felt like a test. I kept my hands still, fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the table. "I don't manage his schedule," I said. "But that email doesn't look right." Mark nodded as if that was what he'd expected. "It didn't to us either," he said. "We're trying to understand how approvals were handled." A knock interrupted us, and a woman I recognized from HR stepped in, rain beating on her blazer. "We're looping legal," she said without preamble, just in case. The escalation was quiet but unmistakable, and I felt the net tightening. "I don't want this to blow up," I said carefully. "Neither do we," Mark replied. "But once there's a pattern, policy requires follow-through." The needle line came from the HR woman, sharp and procedural. "You signed the log earlier than this," she said, tapping the paper. "The camera contradicts you." The consequence was immediate. Mark's jaw tightened, the room's temperature seemed to drop, and my coat sleeve, still wet, felt suddenly heavier against my skin. "I didn't sign anything," I said. "Exactly," she replied, "which is why we're asking." They let me go after that with polite nods and promises to be in touch, but the damage was done. The questions would keep moving with or without me. Back at my desk, my inbox chimed a new message sliding in with a subject line that made my stomach twist. Another schedule notice, another inconsistency forwarded by someone I barely knew. I stared at it, rain tapping against the window behind me, the damp sleeve cooling my pulse just enough to think. This wasn't just about me anymore. Someone had pulled a thread, and the weave was starting to show. I packed up early, the weight of the day pressing down as I left the building, the rain soaking my coat anew. Outside, my phone buzzed with his name, a missed call, then another. I didn't answer. I walked to my car instead, the wet sleeve brushing my skin with every step, a reminder of how exposure spreads. The questions had crossed a line he could no longer control, and the pressure was shifting away from me. I sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine, breathing through the tremor in my hands, knowing the next move wouldn't be mine alone. As the rain kept falling, I understood that witnesses don't always know they're witnesses until it's too late. The parking garage at the office was dimmer than usual, lights throwing long metallic shadows across the concrete as I walked toward my car keys clenched tight enough to bite into my palm. The air smelled of exhaust and damp stone, and my immediate goal had shifted from containment to confirmation, to see whether the financial thread tugging at the edges of everything would finally show its shape. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine and opened my phone, the screen casting a cold glow over my hands. The reimbursement notice had come through an hour earlier, forwarded quietly by someone in accounts who owed me a favor. The message framed as routine, but marked with language that didn't belong. I scrolled slowly, heart thudding, noting the memo line and the masked account digits at the bottom, the way the approval path looped through him before landing somewhere it shouldn't. The metallic shadow from the light above slid across the dashboard as a car passed, and my reflection fractured in the windshield eyes, darker, sharper than I remembered. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered, even as the logic assembled itself without effort. The reimbursement wasn't for food, not directly, but for supplies categorized broadly enough to hide in plain sight, processed in small amounts that wouldn't trigger alarms unless someone knew how to look. The consequence hit immediately. My stomach dropped heat, flushing up my neck as the scope of it widened. This wasn't impulse or rage. This was budgeting. I opened the attachment again, reading the memo line out loud under my breath, the phrasing careful, almost elegant. "Operational necessity," it said. The phrase echoed the tone I'd heard in his voice on the audio, calm and managerial, and something inside me cracked open. I hadn't imagined the warning signs. I hadn't overreacted. I'd recognized a system because I lived inside systems every day. My phone buzzed again, his name lighting the screen, and I let it ring out, watching the vibration skitter across the console like something alive. "Why won't you answer the follow-up text?" read. "We need to talk." The need felt different now, stripped of urgency and recast as control. I typed nothing back. Instead, I forwarded the reimbursement file to myself through a secure channel, noting the reference string and the internal routing path anchoring it in something that couldn't be dismissed as misunderstanding. The cost of that action landed hard once the file moved. There was no pulling it back, no pretending I'd never seen it. I started the car, the engine's rumble grounding me as I pulled out of the space, the metallic shadow sliding away as daylight took over. On the drive home, memories rearranged themselves with brutal clarity, his insistence on handling finances to help the way he'd dismissed my questions as overthinking the small, precise comments designed to keep me second-guessing myself. Each one clicked into place around the reimbursement, forming a picture that was colder and more deliberate than anything I'd let myself imagine. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I knew what it would sound like. Measured concern, a hint of irritation, the unspoken reminder of who usually set the terms. When I got home, the house was empty, lights off, his car gone, and the quiet felt different now, less like safety and more like a pause between moves. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the counter where the plate had been, the light cutting across it just as it had that morning, and felt the last of my doubt drain away. The reimbursement didn't just explain the food, it proved planning, intention, and resources aligned against me. I moved through the house methodically, gathering what I needed, documenting without drama, the metallic shadow following me from room to room as if marking time. By the time I sat down to breathe, the shape of the story was fixed, and so was my role in it. Once the numbers lined up, denial stopped being an option and became a liability. The spare key trembled in my hand as I stood in the hallway, the metal cool and familiar and suddenly heavier than it had ever been before. He'd always insisted I keep it just in case a small gesture framed as care, and my immediate goal now was to use that access without announcing myself to see how he moved when he thought no one was watching. The house was quiet, except for the distant tick of a clock, each second marking time I no longer felt in control of. I slipped the key into the lock and turned it slowly, the click sounding too loud in my ears. The consequence immediate, my heart jumped, breath stalling as I waited to see if anyone stirred. No movement. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the air stale, untouched, the lights still off. His shoes were by the door, neatly aligned, a detail that once read as order and now felt like staging. I moved through the living room toward his office, every sense sharpened, cataloging what belonged and what felt newly out of place. The desk lamp was on, casting a narrow pool of light that made the shadows around it seem deeper by contrast, and I paused just outside the doorway, listening. His voice drifted from the room, low and controlled, followed by the muted response of someone on the other end of a call. "No," he said. "She's not supposed to be there." A pause. I know. My grip tightened on the key, the metal biting into my palm, and the consequence landed hard. Any remaining distance between suspicion and certainty collapsed. I leaned closer, careful to keep my shadow from crossing the doorway. "You're overreacting," he continued. "She gets anxious. That's all." The dismissal was familiar, but hearing it deployed so calmly, so strategically, sent a cold wave through me. Another pause, longer this time. "If she asks, you stick to the script," he said. "Timing is everything." The words echoed the audio I'd already heard, locking the pattern in place with brutal efficiency. I shifted my weight, the floorboard creaking softly beneath me, and his head snapped up, eyes flicking toward the door. "Hold on," he said into the phone. My pulse roared in my ears as I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall, the key clenched tight. He stood, chair-scraping footsteps approaching, and for a split second I thought he'd catch me there. The lie exposed the trap, sprung too early. He stopped just short of the doorway, breathing audible, then laughed softly. "It's nothing," he said into the phone, returning to his desk. Old house noises. I waited, muscles burning, until his voice settled back into its measured rhythm before easing away, retreating down the hall with the same care I'd used to enter. In the kitchen, I set the key down on the counter and stared at it, my reflection warped along its edge, the image trembling just like my hand. This wasn't just about what he'd done. It was about how easily he dismissed me as a variable to be managed, a problem to be contained. My phone buzzed with a new message, as if summoned by the thought. "We need to talk tonight," he wrote. "You're making things harder than they need to be." The line landed like a threat dressed as reason. I typed nothing back. Instead, I scrolled through my notes, the evidence stacking neatly now, residue witnesses, logs, audio schedules, reimbursements, each piece alone, deniable together, suffocating. The key lay between me and the phone, an object that had once symbolized trust and now represented how close danger had been to my door. Hearing him rehearse my erasure made it impossible to pretend this was confusion instead of intent. I slid the key into my pocket and turned off the light, the room plunging into darkness that felt oddly clarifying. By the time he realized I'd stopped playing along the lock, he trusted most would already be useless. The auditorium lights were too bright for comfort. A wash of white that erased soft edges and made faces readable from the back row, and I chose a seat near the aisle because exits matter when truth is about to move faster than people expect. The event had been framed as routine quarterly updates, a few congratulatory slides, polite applause, but the room hummed with phones and murmurs, an audience primed without knowing why, and my immediate goal was singular and dangerous. Let the proof speak before anyone tried to manage it. He stood near the stage with the other executive's jacket, buttoned posture composed the practiced ease of someone used to being believed. "Smile," a colleague whispered, and he did the expression landing perfectly for the room. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, then the steadier weight beneath it, the calm that comes when a plan has already passed the point of doubt. The projector whirred to life behind the podium, a low mechanical sound that cut through the chatter, and the first slide appeared agenda items, harmless, expected. "We'll keep this brief," the host said, tapping the mic. "Just a few operational highlights." Applause. A click. Another slide. He glanced toward the screen, bored, confident. I stood as the next transition began, the movement small, but enough to draw eyes, and lifted my phone not to speak but to connect. One moment the host said, startled, "We're—" The screen flickered, then steadied, and the room leaned forward as a still image replaced the deck, a time-stamped CCTV frame, crisp and unmistakable, the kitchen counter visible. The plate centered his hands in motion. Gasps rippled a soft wave moving from front to back. "Is that?" someone whispered. "Pause there," a voice said calmly from the aisle. Not mine, amplified by a handheld mic, as the ops manager stepped into the light. "This is a verified still," he continued. "Venue cameras time-coded." He looked to the host. "Please don't cut the feed." The host swallowed and nodded. He stiffened on stage, the smile freezing eyes flicking to the exits as if calculating distance. "This isn't appropriate," he said, voice steady, pitched for reason. "We can address any concerns privately." "We tried," the ops manager replied, tapping the tablet in his hand. "The footage addresses them publicly." The image advanced one frame, then another, the timestamp ticking forward his movement, precise, methodical. "That's my kitchen," someone said behind me. "Those are our counters." "Why is he—" Another murmur, sharper now. He lifted his hands, palms out. "Everyone relax," he said, tone managerial. "You're seeing context without explanation." "Then explain," the host said, voice thin. "Explain the sequence." The ops manager zoomed in the time-stamped CCTV, still enlarging the plate's rim, catching the light. "Read the time out loud," a woman in the front row said, standing. "The room should hear it." The needle line cut clean, and the consequence followed instantly. Phones rose red, recording dots bloomed across the dark. "This is a violation," he snapped the first crack in the calm. "You don't have authorization." "We do," the ops manager replied, "and legal is on standby." A door at the back opened, quietly controlled, and two uniformed officers stepped just inside the threshold, not advancing, waiting. Authority held until the proof finished its work. The still advanced again, then again, showing the delivery path the moment his hands left the counter. The plate moved into frame. "That timestamp doesn't match," he said too quickly. "The camera clock drifts." "It doesn't," the ops manager said. "Synced at the top of the hour." A beat. Silence thickened. "That plate," someone said softly. "It's the same one." He looked at me. Then finally, eyes narrowing, and the room felt smaller for it. "You did this," he said, accusation naked now. "You're making a scene." "No," I replied, voice steady as the mic found me. The scene was already there. The image changed to a second still, then a short clip, the timestamp continuous, undeniable. When the CCTV froze on his hands and the time code held steady, the room understood that intention doesn't need a speech. A man near the aisle cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, badge catching the light as he stepped forward, "we'll take it from here." Only then did authority move, measured and procedural, one officer approaching the stage, while the other remained by the door, the choreography precise. "Sir," the officer said, calm, "please step down. This is outrageous," he said, backing away from the podium. "You can't do this." "We can," the officer replied. "And we are." The crowd parted instinctively, a human corridor opening as he descended the murmurs, now a single low sound. "Keep smiling. Your image is on the screen," someone said. "Not cruel, just factual." He stopped beside me close enough that I could smell his cologne, the familiar note suddenly cloying. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "This isn't over." "It is," I said, and meant the room, not him. The officers guided him toward the aisle, the projector still humming behind us, the time-stamped CCTV still glowing, and the host stood frozen at the podium, hands gripping the edges. Phones tracked the movement, recording vector-complete witness wave, rolling from shock to silence to averted eyes. The ops manager cut the feed only after the officers reached the doors, the image disappearing with a click that felt like a seal. Applause didn't come. It wasn't that kind of ending. People stood whispered, checked messages, recalibrated the stories they'd tell later. I remained seated for a moment longer, breathing through the aftershock, the white light flattening everything until there was nowhere left for doubt to hide. As the doors closed behind him and the screen went dark, the timestamp became the loudest thing in the room. The days after the auditorium blurred into a controlled quiet, the kind that follows a public rupture when systems move faster than emotions can keep up. I sat at the kitchen table alone, the flickering bulb above the sink finally replaced its steady light, revealing every surface without mercy, and my immediate goal was no longer exposure, but endurance, to let the process finish without letting myself unravel inside it. Papers arrived in clean envelopes, language precise and bloodless, outlining next steps in tones that pretended neutrality while carrying weight. "We'll need a formal statement," a woman from legal said over the phone, her voice calm, efficient. "Nothing speculative. Just what you observed." "I can do that," I replied, surprised by how steady I sounded. The bulb didn't flicker. That felt important. Meetings followed, each one orderly, chairs aligned, water glasses untouched. He wasn't in any of them. "He's been placed on administrative hold," someone explained as if describing a scheduling change. "Access revoked pending review." The words landed with a dull finality, and the consequence followed immediately, a loosening in my chest I hadn't realized I'd been holding tight. At work, colleagues avoided my eyes at first, then nodded with careful respect, the atmosphere shifting from curiosity to caution. "That must have been hard," one woman said quietly near the copier. "Necessary," I answered, and meant both meanings. At home, silence replaced his presence, drawers untouched, shoes gone from the door, the space reorganizing itself around absence. An officer came by once to collect additional items, his badge catching the steady kitchen light, as he documented everything with measured calm. "This will take time," he said, "but the evidence trail is solid." I nodded, the words solid and trail echoing in my mind, grounding me. I met with a counselor at the company's suggestion, sat on a neutral couch, and spoke in sentences that sounded rehearsed until they softened into something real. "You didn't imagine this," she said gently. "Your body reacted for a reason." The validation landed quietly without drama and stayed. One afternoon, a message came through my secure inbox, brief and procedural, informing me that charges were being recommended, that further contact should go through counsel only. I closed the laptop and sat there, hands folded, the steady bulb casting a clean circle of light on the table. I thought of the mornings before this, of the trust that had once lived in that same light, and felt something like grief move through me, sharp but passing. When the system confirmed what my instincts had known, justice felt less like triumph and more like oxygen returning to a sealed room. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I washed the dishes, lined them up to dry, noticed how the reflection in the glass no longer doubled or warped. Outside traffic hummed ordinary and indifferent. Inside the house held steady, no longer waiting for a next move. With the bulb burning clean and unwavering, I understood that safety doesn't announce itself, it simply stays. I stand in the kitchen again, present tense folding over itself, the same counter, the same window, the same early light sliding in at an angle that once made everything feel uncertain. The glass reflection on the table is clean now, a single image instead of two, and my immediate goal is simple, in a way it hasn't been for months to exist in the space without calculating risk. I pour coffee slowly, watching the dark surface settle, steam rising in a steady column that doesn't carry any hidden edge. The house is quiet, but it's a different quiet than before, no longer expectant, no longer sharp, with withheld breath. Outside, a car passes light briefly skimming the wall, and I notice it without flinching. That feels like progress. The chair across from me is empty, its absence no longer charged, just factual, and I let myself acknowledge the truth without dramatizing it. I survived because I paused, because I trusted a signal I'd been taught to doubt, because I didn't eat what was placed in front of me. I washed the mug and set it upside down on the rack, the glass catching the light and holding it without distortion. My phone buzzes once with a notification. I don't rush to check the urgency drain from the sound, now that no one is monitoring my reactions. I move through the house opening windows, letting air circulate the routine grounding rather than numbing. In the bedroom, I straighten the sheets, noticing how my hands move without hesitation, muscle memory recalibrated. There's paperwork still to finish, meetings, still to attend, but they sit on the horizon as tasks, not threats. I pause at the sink, palms flat on the counter, and look at my reflection in the glass panel behind it, my face steady, eyes clear. The motif resolves without ceremony. The reflection finally matches the truth. No doubling, no misalignment, no hidden angle required. I think of Megan, of the room full of witnesses, of the timestamp that spoke louder than any explanation, and I feel a quiet gratitude for systems that can hold when people fail. I step outside for a moment, the air cool, the day beginning in earnest, and breathe in without bracing for consequence. The reflection in the glass shows exactly who I am now, and for the first time, nothing about it feels dangerous. I lock the door behind me out of habit, not fear, and walk to my car with an unhurried gait, keys steady in my hand. What saved my life wasn't luck or courage, but the moment I stopped forcing myself to swallow what felt wrong.